Okay, do that so I can see everybody. Okay, so today is week 5 of Ecclesiastes. And I know some of you are saying, thank goodness, and because it's also the last week of Ecclesiastes, we're going to do chapters 11 and 12. A brief review, because I like to do brief reviews. Remember, this took place Solomon, it's written by Solomon. It's part of the wisdom books. Solomon lived from 990 to 930. He lived 60 years. He became king or 59 years. He became king when he was 19. He was king for 40 years. He died at 50. He died at 59. He wrote some of the Psalms. He wrote the Proverbs. He wrote the Song of Solomon. He also wrote this book. This book was written at the latter part of his life. He was raised knowing God. David was his father. At the end of his life, he lost his way. And one of the things before I turn it over to you, we talked about what, we hear a lot, why is this book in the Bible? And Scott and I have discussed this a lot this week. This book, we believe this book is in the Bible because we believe that the Bible is the inerrant word of God, and God wanted this book in the Bible.
So there, live with that.
Yeah. The second question is, what can we get out of it? It has been vanities of vanities. It has been, it's been a lot of negative, is life worth it? And I think it is, for me, it's a wake-up call. Solomon was given wisdom, wealth. He looked for happiness with wisdom, wealth, women, and work. Yeah. And he didn't find it. So to me, it's a wake-up call. But I think we should not question why it's there as much as keep studying it until we figure out a message to us. And I know most of you have heard this story. My mother grew up going to church all the time. She was not a Bible reader because she was brought up in the Catholic Church, when the Catholic Church let the priests do the Bible more than them. So when I started doing Bible studies, I would call her every Tuesday before I'd go to this women's Bible study. And one time I said, Mom, I got to get off the phone. I got to get into the Bible study. And she said, you're not finished with that book yet. And, hopefully we'll never be finished with this book. So now.
All right.
Sorry.
So we try and teach what's here to the best of our ability and what we're given. My sort of obsession with words, and there's a reason for that. And if this will make sense, we don't have as much today and it's repetitive, but sometimes we need to talk about how to study in general. And I read last week, there was a British member of parliament, like our Senate, and he was going on about how the word women or woman comes from the words womb and man. And it was supposed to be proof of how men view women as just something with a womb, with the ability to bear children. The problem is, it's absolutely false. We know where the word women came from. It has nothing to do with that. He made it up. It's goofy. But people go at things with agendas often. And when you go at something with an agenda, you can generally find a way to affirm what you want to say. And that's what that person did. So in this study of Solomon, we've had people say, why is this in here? But I know there's also, we've mentioned his 700 wives and 300 concubines virtually every week, probably multiple times a week. And I waited on this because I know there are people who doubt that. And there are also people who look at this last chapter and say, well, Solomon got it at the end. Solomon figured it out and he got it right at the end. No, he didn't. So what we haven't brought to you is you can flip over to 1 Kings 11. And I want to read you some more information about Solomon. This is 1 Kings chapter 11. And it tells us explicitly. King Solomon, however, loved many foreign women along with the daughter of Pharaoh, women of Moab, Ammon, Edom, Sidon, as well as Hittite women. These women were from the nations about which the Lord had said, had told the Israelites, you must not intermarry with them, for surely they will turn your hearts after their gods. Yet Solomon clung to these women in love. He had 700 wives of royal birth, 300 concubines, and his wives turned his heart away. Now, we didn't make that up. And early in this, I know some people, hear these things and maybe it's unpleasant, but that's a simple fact. It tells us, and it says that he winds up worshiping Ashtaroth and Molech and the abomination of the Ammonites and all these things that he worshiped. And it says, now the Lord grew angry with Solomon because his heart had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice. Although he had warned Solomon explicitly not to follow other gods, Solomon did not keep the Lord's command. So the idea that Solomon here at the end, people read one verse and get to the end and they go, at least he figured it out at the end. No, he didn't. And we're told that he didn't. We're told explicitly, no, he didn't. And we sort of saved this. This is sort of an example of general study. It's rarely just so easy as reading a verse or two out of context and then saying, you know what, I believe this or I believe that. What we believe is, often immaterial when we have some evidence that says it's not that way. So what we said from the beginning is Solomon, early in his life, worshiped Yahweh. And later in life, when it says that he had these, 700 wives and 300 concubines, his heart turned away. And this is a big part. We said that we see how negative and how down and how defeated Solomon is. That's a big part of how he got that way. So as we talk about how do we avoid it, one way is to remember that, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai, God, there is one God. The Lord is our God, the Lord alone. Solomon forgot that, and you see direct, really stark evidence of what it did for him. He winds
Does this section say what God was going to do as his kingdom? Did he tell Solomon here?
Oh, it does. It says, because you've done this and have not kept my covenant and my statutes, which I commanded you, I will tear the kingdom away from you and give it to your servant. Nevertheless, for the sake of your father David, I will not do it during your lifetime. I will tear it out of the hand of your son. Yet I will not tear the whole kingdom away from him. I will give one tribe to him. So Solomon's been warned. He's been told. If you were here for the study on Saul, do you remember Saul got a message like that and just completely went off the deep end because he couldn't stand the thought of his line coming to an end? I think part of this is God has told him there's going to be a consequence. And Solomon says, well, then what's it all for? These are the things we see in this book of Ecclesiastes. We see a man who has left Yahweh and has been told there's going to be consequences, and he doesn't like that. And it is that rebellion. And for this Virginia's on. Virginia, thank you for sending that to us. It was perfectly timely. You're exactly right. But it is this sort of rebellion against God that leaves Solomon in a place that's just not a pleasant way to live.
Now, the other side of that, some people would say, so is Solomon in heaven or is Solomon in hell? Above our pay grade.
We do not speculate.
What we know, this isn't about his salvation. We know that his life more abundant, that God tells us we are supposed to have a life more abundant here, that towards the end of his life or his later years, he did not have a life more abundant. And you have to remember, when he was first a king at 19, he prayed to God, and that at that time he referred to God as Yahweh. He prayed for Yahweh, and he asked for one thing. He asked for wisdom. And listened to a great sermon this week and said, you know, he didn't ask for something. He didn't ask to be rich. He didn't ask for that. He asked for wisdom, and God granted him wisdom. So God gave him what he asked for, and then he misused it. And that's when he fell away. And you have to remember again that in the book of Ecclesiastes, what we don't see, because we don't know the words like Scott knows the words, he does not refer to God as Yahweh anymore. He is referring to God as Elohim, which means a God. And so it's like our world today. If you ask someone, do you believe in God? I believe in a higher being. Basically, he believes in a higher being at this point. He does not have a personal relationship with God.
So one last piece of housekeeping. I've thought from the start, I don't want people to go through this study and come out the other end depressed. I don't want to look at this and say, well, Solomon said it. And so we've seen that Solomon is off track with this, but I want to read something from Corinthians, from Paul, and Mary brought this. You want to read it?
No, you can go ahead.
So Paul brings a different perspective to this. Therefore, we do not lose heart. Though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed every day. You see the difference between this and Solomon. Solomon is obsessed with the fact that he's going to die. And what Paul says is, yeah, you know, guess, and this is to me clearly a reference to Solomon and what he's done. And he says, yeah, you know, if you live with this and you go this route, you've missed the point. Outwardly, we are wasting away, yet inwardly, we're being renewed every day. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen. Since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. And this is Solomon's big mistake of setting his eyes on the seen that is temporary and not the unseen. And you remember Paul later says, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things unseen. And we live by faith. And and so the one last piece of housekeeping, and then we're actually going to get back to the scriptures. But some people I've heard little bits and pieces. Well, could Solomon really be expected to get this in the Old Testament? This idea of live by faith and fix your eyes on things unseen. And I hear people saying, you know, I mean, you can't expect too much of him. He's in the Old Testament. But Paul deals with that too. And this is in his letter to the Hebrews, and who happen to be what? Israel, Jews. And he says, by faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went. And he has this whole chapter dedicated to Old Testament people who lived by faith, that Jacob, as he was about to die, blesses the sons of Joseph. You know, he has to lean on a staff to even stand up. They lived by faith. And it tells us through that chapter. Another time we should do this study. But he says they were looking at the things unseen. They trusted God and looked forward to something they would never see, because they knew they were going to die, and they didn't get to the state that Solomon got to. So as we close this, keep in mind that Solomon got to a place he was never intended to be. He quit living by faith. He has 700 wives and 300 concubines, and it made him miserable. And so as we talk about this, the idea that God gave him some commandments to follow, it's not because God loves giving commandments. I am convinced that he's not hiding behind a tree waiting for one of you to trip up so that he can get angry at you. The fact is, a lot of these things that he tells us are not good for us. And Solomon is living proof. And so, Jack, once again, why is this in here? It is a contrast precisely to who we're supposed to be. And it's hard sometimes to see one side without seeing the other. I believe it belongs here. So enough of my tirade.
Chapter 11, yes, go ahead.
I'm sorry,
What do I have to do here? I have to press this one?
one king, right?
I said what?
First Kings,
One king,
First Kings.
yes, First
first
Kings.
king,
Yeah.
same thing as one king,
I'll live with it. Yeah.
Yes,
that's way up in our text of Bible, before we get to Ecclesiastes.
It is.
but remember the Bible, the books in the Bible are not in order.
They're not in order.
I understand,
Okay,
but that sounds to me like first king, having seen what happened to Solomon, is now, although it appears on
You
top,
think it's after the fact?
yeah,
I believe it's not, and we've done some pretty extensive study on it. It is some of these things. The Book of Kings is a, you know, it's a, I hate to say a chronicle because there's a Book of Chronicles, but it is. I don't believe it's after the fact. He was told this, and what we're seeing in Ecclesiastes is near the end of Solomon's lifetime, and it is the fulfillment of what was told. Yeah. I don't think this is the Book of Kings, that portion of it is written after the fact, Gene, and we can go through it. But just like when I told you that it was the 700 wives and 300 concubines that led him astray, I'm not making it up. And I can show you reasons why I believe that was something where it's a recount that he was told that. There's a lot of this stuff, the overlap between the books, but we can go through it.
and the other thing in this presentation is Solomon is presented in Ecclesiastes as a intellectual thing. He's looking for, I guess, truth, unquote. And he gives up, and he gets to that state where he's at. But he doesn't say the word faith or believe or anything like that that gets us to Paul's New Testament all the way to the top. These guys actually lived faith. They couldn't understand it, they knew there was something. And he lived in.
Okay, well, let me see if I can address this. We are told way before Paul, actually back in the very beginning, that Abraham believed and it was counted unto him as righteousness. That's
Right.
faith. And so this is not a new concept. This is not a thing that occurs strictly in the New Testament. And that's what Paul is recounting. He's going back and saying, hey, look, these people live by faith. And he says, since we're surrounded by this great cloud of witnesses, we should in turn do this. But since you mentioned that he's presented as an intellectual, keep in mind, no, he presents himself as an intellectual. He is, in fact, he's a very brilliant guy. But that's Solomon, that's my story about me. And so I think he's going to be a little more favorable. You know, he presents himself that way. And then the last thing, there was one thing you said, and I really need to bring this down. But well, and I can only get that, I only get half of it. I think that Solomon, what we said from the beginning is that Solomon has left his faith and it has not worked out well for him. And he says, you know, I'm the most brilliant guy ever. And I'm telling you, all of it's worthless. You know, don't even bother with this. It's just, you know, have a drink, enjoy some time, the few days that you have. This is not a way for us to live. And I think that's the example. So you ready to go?
I am. Chapter 10, remember we left last week, chapter 10 was a list of basically proverbs of the foolish. And one of the things you have to realize about Ecclesiastes and about Solomon, he states a lot of truths that we can take with us, but some of his conclusions about these truths are wrong. So chapter 11, cast your bread upon the waters, for after many days you will find it again. Divide your portion among 7 or even 8, for you do not know what disaster may befall the land.
So this idea of casting your bread upon the waters, I know what maybe it's presumptuous to talk about this man who was given great wisdom and say this, he's not being real wise here, but sorry, that's what's going on. Cast your bread upon the waters is sort of a saying that has to do with being generous. and you give with no hope of return. If you cast your bread on the water, the tide and the wind it'll sink and you'll never see it again. So you're just being generous, right? Look at what Solomon says. Cast your bread upon the waters, for after many days you will find it again. What? I mean, this is the wise man, and he is just now at this point saying, cast your bread upon the waters, and after many days it'll come, the tide will wash it back into. It's
So
just,
if you're generous, you'll get something in return.
you'll get something in return. This man has lost his way. And it doesn't mean he's no longer wise, except in certain places he has lost his way. And then he says, divide your portion among 7 or 8. You never know what disaster may befall the land. What he's saying is diversify. Don't put all your eggs in one basket, because things are bound to go wrong. And maybe you'll have a little something tucked away. This is what consumes Solomon now. It is sad. I feel sorry for him at this state near the end of his life. So let's move on.
If the clouds are full, they will pour out rain upon the earth. Whether a tree falls to the south or to the north, in the place where it falls, there it will lie. He who watches the wind will fail to sow, and he who observes the clouds will fail to reap.
You see a pattern here in this stuff with Solomon. If the clouds are full, it'll rain. If they're not, it's not going to rain. God has nothing to do with this. If there happens to be something up there, it's going to rain on you. He says, whether a tree falls to the north or the south, wherever it lays, that's where it's going to stay. It's all bad. It's all going wrong. And he just keeps going. He who watches the wind wind will fail to sow. If you're so busy looking for signs, if you're so busy trying to figure things out, you're going to miss your opportunity to plant seeds. So just get in there and plant, and then late at night come home and get a second job, because you're probably going to need it. It's all bad. That's where he is.
As you do not know the path of the wind, or how the bones are formed in a mother's womb, so you cannot understand the work of God, the maker of all things.
So nobody understands the path of the wind. I mentioned it before, I'll mention it again because it's worth noting. In Hebrew, the word for breath, the word for wind, and the word for spirit is one word. It is ruach. Now, as it happens in Greek, the word for breath, the word for wind, and the word for spirit is one word, and it is pneuma. There is a reason for that. They look at the wind as the hand of God, the work of God. They look at the breath in your body as life coming from God, and the spirit that resides in you, all one thing. That was the theory behind those words being the same. And he makes one reference, and I'm going to step lightly here, but he says, that you don't know the path of the wind, but he also says we don't know how bones are formed in a mother's womb. Go back to the Hebrew, and the word that's used there in that description
For form.
is ruach. How the bones are formed has to do with how the spirit, how God imbues and creates life. God creates life, and we don't understand how it goes from being just bones to being something knitted together and alive with the spirit. We listened
to a great sermon this week that, 3,000 years ago, they would argue about when life started, and we're still arguing about it today. So, I mean, isn't that, that when you think, and the bones are formed, that, like Scott says, that phrase means when life.
Ruach, it has to do with spirit. It is much more than just the physical body. That's the thing that you have to keep in mind. And when we lose that sense that God imbues us with life from the very beginning, then we begin to turn all of this into something that is much more, I don't know how to say it, but it is clinical, but not accurate.
Sow your seed in the morning, and do not rest your hands in the evening, for you do not know which will succeed, whether this or that, or if both will equally prosper.
And I already covered that. That's
Mhm.
basically it. Just, just keep busy because something's going to fail. As I told you before, it's growing up in Texas. Never mind if the horse goes blind, just load the wagon. Just, because you don't know. You need to have a lot of irons in the fire because things are going to go bad. This life is bad, and maybe one of them will work out for you. This is a terrible way to live.
Light is sweet, and it pleases the eyes to see the sun. So if a man lives many years, let him rejoice in them all. But let him remember the days of darkness, for they will be many. Everything to come is futile. Rejoice, O young man, while you're young, and let your heart be glad in the days of your youth. Walk in the ways of your heart and in the sight of your eyes. But know that for all these things, God will bring you to judgment. So banish sorrow from your heart and cast off pain from your body, for youth and vigor are fleeting.
So Harry just keeps rolling. And I almost hate to be this monotonous. Life is sweet and it pleases the eye to see this. So if a man lives many years, let him rejoice in them all. That sounds pretty good, but let him remember the days of darkness, for there will be many. I mean, he can't even talk about one thing without saying, but it's just Eeyore. It's going to be, it's just, I know, but I'm going to be out of food tomorrow and I'll have something to eat today. But this is Eeyore stuff. But rejoice, O young man, while you are young. Let your heart be glad in the days of your youth. I wish I had spent more time just reveling and less time studying when I was younger, because now I've wasted all of this stuff. I didn't go, but I want you to pay attention to something. And that is in verse, what is that? 9? Halfway through, walk in the ways of your heart and in the sight of your eyes. Walk in the ways of your heart says just, do, if it feels good, do it. Just go where your heart leads you. Do whatever. And in the sight of your eyes, there's a couple of points, but in the book of Ruth at the beginning, it was in the time of the judges that we're told is one of the worst times in the history of Israel. And it uses a phrase that every man did what was right in his own eyes. They just did whatever they wanted to do, what's right in their own eyes. And we teach, and I try not to sermonize, but we are firmly into a time where people are doing what is right in their own eyes. And it's about, whatever I want. I was at HEB here a few weeks ago, and a woman is going across the crosswalk, and a guy in a truck is talking on a phone and looking the other direction and snatched the basket out of her hand with his truck. And he's shoving and she's screaming and people are screaming. This guy doesn't even know he has a basket that he's shoving on the front end of his truck, and it goes out and bashes in. He's doing what's right in his own eyes. I've got a phone call I need to make. I need to get out of this parking lot. I have no obligation to anyone but me. And, if I wanted to be like Solomon, I could give you a few hundred examples. We have firmly entered a time when people are doing what is right in their own eyes. And that's what Solomon just advised. When you're in the days of your youth, man, you've got all the vigor and everything else. Do what your heart tells you and do what's right in your own eyes. This is the way to go, my friend. There's the advice he's giving. But know that for all these things, God will bring you to judgment. So go ahead and do it, but just understand God's going to judge you for doing it, right? But he's going to judge you anyway. We've already established he's going to judge the wicked and the righteous. That's what God does. He judges. He sits behind a tree and waits for us to mess up so that he may judge us. So go ahead and do it. If you're going to get judged anyway, do it. That's what that's what his advice is. So banish sorrow from your heart and cast off pain from your body, for youth and vigor are fleeting. Contrast that to what Paul said that I just read to you, that the outward man is decaying. The inward man is being renewed every day. And we are renewed every day. And yes, we age, these things happen. But there is absolute cause for joy in this recognition. Solomon doesn't recognize any daily renewal of the inward man. So while, do what I should have done while you're young, live it up, and just be judged for it down the road.
So in Ecclesiastes,
Hold on.
I'm sorry, yeah.
I struggle with that, but know that all of these things God will bring you to judgment. It sounds to me like a left-handed threat. Be careful. You can go party if you want to, but remember, I hear my mother say, but remember, there's a price to this. God's going to hold you in judgment. So
I would say, Gene, you're right, but with the caveat that he's already instructed people. And then after that, he instructs them again, just go do it. Just go do it. And he has just said, follow the ways of your heart and in the sight of your eyes. Just do it.
Because there's no other option. If you don't do it, you could live a miserable life and then life is over. So
go do it and just know God's going to judge you. I mean, I think you can't read those two things, one sentence right after the other, one without the other. Go do it. Just know God's going to judge you for doing it. But hey, he's already told us we can't get out of context. He's already told us through this book, he judges everybody. He judges the righteous. He judges the wicked. And we all wind up in the same place. We all die. So you might as well, while you're young and you have your strength, just enjoy it and pay for it later. I don't think you can read them out of context. I don't think you can separate those two concepts.
Well, one of the things is to go back to your Yahweh, Elohim. When I see that capital G,
yes,
I want to think Yahweh. And he's not even considering that for his own life.
When we brought that concept, we went back to Psalms written in his early days, and he talks about Yahweh. David they talk about Yahweh. He hits this point, and we told you this morning, there it is in 1 Kings, God was angry at him, right? He has changed. He has been led astray. And it specifically says, and there's other, historical context, that he began to worship these pagan gods. If you'll be patient, in the next chapter, I'm going to absolutely prove to you that he has begun worshiping, prove to you that he's been worshiping pagan gods. So stick with me just a minute.
So you remember back in Ecclesiastes 3, which is the part of Ecclesiastes that most of us hear about, that's, at funerals, there's a time and a place for everything. And he writes beautifully. And we showed you a number of songs that actually use that. But once again, there's a time and a place for everything. And then he believes that, all of it is still fleeting. So we sort of take that part out of context too. He's a beautiful writer in that place, and that's true. And they are truisms, but his conclusion there was not correct. When we get to chapter 12, this next section we're going to read, and I'll stop verse by verse so Scott can explain what it is. People say it's a really, not beautiful poem. It's a really accurate, descriptive, poetic poem.
It's a poetic poem.
A poetic poem on aging. And he really describes aging very poetically, but very depressing. His conclusion is depressing, but back to his good writing.
And you don't need to stop for me. You were talking it last night. You explain what they mean.
Well, I'm not sure I can remember all. So verse 1, remember your creator in the days of your youth, before the days of adversity come, and the years approach of which you will say, I find no pleasure in them. Before the light of the sun, moon, and stars is darkened, and the clouds return after the rain. On the day, so here it says, enjoy being young before you start to get old. And now he's going to describe getting old.
And you said the years come where you say, I find no pleasure in them. Like, I just got no pleasure in life. Yeah.
On the day the keeper of the house tremble. They say that means the keeper of the house is your arms. That when your arms start to shake.
Well, don't skip, you skip the part about the light of the sun, moon, and stars being darkened. That
okay, go ahead.
is,
That according to what I was reading, that just means when old age comes.
oh, well, no,
Yeah.
this is him giving poetic
Yeah.
descriptions of getting old. The light of the sun, moon, and stars fade as our vision begins to go.
And the clouds return after the rain. On the day of the keepers of the house tremble, and the strong men stoop. When those grinding cease because they are few. When you start losing your teeth and you can't chew anymore.
This has got nothing to do with people grinding grain, and there aren't enough grinders. This is him saying when the grinding stops because the teeth are few.
And those watching through the windows see dimly. Once again, when your eyesight starts to go. When the doors to the street are shut and the sound of the mill fades away. When you start, when one rises at the, so that first part, I'm sorry. When the doors of the street are shut and the sound of the mill fades away. When your hearing goes bad. When one rises at the sound of a bird and all the daughters of song grow faint. When, as you age, you sleep less and you get up at the crack of dawn. When men fear the heights and dangers of the road, and that's when they say, as you age, you get more fearful of things. When the almond tree blossoms, they said, listened to it last night, an almond tree, when it blossoms, it's all white. So when your hair is gray, the grasshopper loses its spring and the caperberry shrivels. For then men goes to his eternal home and the mourners walk the streets. That sounds like some poem we could learn in English class of the aging process. Remember him before the silver cord is snapped and the golden bowl is crushed.
All right, stop right there.
Okay, now he takes him.
Remember him, and this is capitalized. They think that means remember Yahweh, but before the silver cord is snapped, there are religions, these pagan religions, who believe that we, all of us, are attached with a silver, invisible silver cord to some life-giving ether, okay? And when the silver cord is snapped, we die. This is not worship of Yahweh, and I don't remember which ones I should tell you, but this idea of a silver cord, and they literally, some of their shaman people tried to invent ways to cut someone's silver cord so that you could kill them without having to stab them or do anything else to them. You could kill them from a distance. If we can just figure ways to do the ritual and cut someone's silver cord, they will die. And that's, after all, what we want. But there you go, Gene. This is Solomon putting into here a concept that is absolutely, identifiably not Jewish, not worship of Yahweh. It's like Ashtaroth, that we have this life-giving thing that's the divisible silver cord that brings life to us. Solomon has turned his heart to these pagan gods, and the golden bowl is crushed. That also has to do with another one of these beliefs that our soul, our essence is in this golden bowl, and if it's crushed, we die. It's the same thing. Solomon is espousing pagan religion in this last bit. And when we started this, we told you he had 700 wives, 300 concubines, and he followed them to his disadvantage, we'll say. It did not serve him well. There's a reference directly from the pagan religions that he has picked up from these foreign wives. It's there, and it can't be. You'll never see anything else about that in the Bible, because it doesn't come from our, from the Jewish follow of Yahweh. It is pagan religion. Sorry, it's just there.
Before the pitcher is shattered at the spring and the will is broken at the well, before the dust returns to the ground from which it came, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. Futility of futilities, says the teacher, everything is futile. And remember, so, when you read that, you say, and the spirit returns to God, it sounds sort of Good, but that God, once again, is not Yahweh. That God is,
Ha Elohim, and it means the God, some God. The El actually was Canaanite, and it's just a word. It's a word, but what it does show is that he's not talking about Yahweh, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob and Esau, and all, well, not Esau's, but you get the idea. He has devolved. He has gone away from this love of Yahweh into a very disconnected view of God. And that's the root of Solomon's problem.
so, and it's not, and we weren't picking on anybody here. This last section, there are theologians and pastors, and I listened to a pastor last night who says it's verse 13 and 14, which are the last two verses of a 12-chapter book, that says this is where he gets it. Okay. And, but I will
You're
read
going to
this.
start at 9?
I'm going to start at 9. Not only was the teacher wise, but he also taught the people knowledge. He pondered, searched out, and arranged many proverbs.
We'll pause this again. There you
Sure.
go, Gene. There's where you said he was presented as being this intellectual guy. He's presenting himself. He's talking about himself. And not only was he wise, but he taught the people knowledge. And there's a good thing about the difference between knowledge and wisdom, right? He, in addition to his wisdom, he knew a lot of stuff. Sheba came because of his knowledge, and she was just amazed at all of this stuff, these facts that he has. It says that he wrote about birds and trees and fish, and but he talks about the difference between knowledge and wisdom. Something I didn't recognize until way too late in life. And sometimes I'll tell you some fun stories maybe, but you can be knowledgeable and not wise in how you use it. And I'm living proof of that. So.
And I agree with all of that, but his prayer was for wisdom.
Yes, it was. And he got it, and he did well. And then he got caught up in himself.
And he asked Yahweh for wisdom, and then he forgot about Yahweh.
The thing that I want to give you on this, and the rest of you, because someone else has to be thinking this, how can a guy so wise go so wrong? And it's because he started believing that his wisdom came from himself. And he started trusting to himself and not to Yahweh. And it's a problem, Gene. It's a big problem.
I hear it, but I hear Paul. I hear Paul in here.
Okay.
He got separated to himself. He left Yahweh and all the other gods to himself. He became God.
I'm convinced that's right. I'm convinced that neither life nor death nor anything else can separate us from the love of God. Solomon, though, you can separate yourself in great degree by simply following Solomon's example.
The words of the wise are like goads, and the anthologies of the masters are like firmly embedded nails driven by a single shepherd. Want to take that one?
The words of the wise are like goads. He's saying that all of this stuff, the proverbs, the things we've been taught, the words of the wise, a goad is a pointed stick. It's like spurs for a horse, and it's designed to get you moving and to get you moving in the right direction. And that's all he's saying. But you got to read the next line for this too.
And by these, my son, be further warned. There is no end to the making of many books, and much study wearies the body.
So he's coming to the end. We only have 2 more sentences left. And he says, the words of the wise are like goads. They're like spurs for a horse, get you going in the right direction. But let me warn you, my son, and this is sort of this general, the young person kind of a son, that let me read it his way. There's no end to the making of many books, and much study wearies the body. So you're young. If you're a young person, do not waste your time like I did, trying to be wise and trying to write books and write proverbs and give advice for the next generation, because much study just wearies the body. It's futility. It's vanity. It is, it's worthless. Go have some fun.
When all has been heard, the conclusion of the matter is this: fear God and keep his commandments, because this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every deed into judgment along with every hidden thing, whether good or evil.
So there are people who take the last sentence or two and say, oh, Solomon got it at the end. Let me give you my interpretation, because it's consistent with everything else that he said. It says, when all has been heard, the conclusion is fear God and keep his commandments, because this is the whole duty of man, right? And it sounds like he's saying it's good to, but you remember he's also said that go and enjoy your work, because that's our lot in life. That's all we got. That's, and he says it multiple times, that's your lot in life. Just this little sliver that you've got, you might as well enjoy it, because there's nothing else. And what I believe he's saying here is that the fear of God, because that's the whole duty, is we're just here to follow God, who's going to kill us at the end, who's going to let our eyes go dark and our ears go, everything else. And that's all we get. But then if you doubt that, read the last sentence. For God will bring every deed into judgment along with every hidden thing, whether good or evil. He's going to judge everything anyway, right? So he's not saying that my advice to you is follow God and keep his commandments. He says, you do this because he's going to, you're going to get judged. That's what he's all about. This is a sad ending for a man who was very, very wise.
And so, this last chapter, what some people do is there's 3 points: remember your creator, which is in verse 1, and then fear God and keep his commandments. And they can do a whole sermon on those 3 points, because, ministers always do things on 3 points. And all those statements are true, you guys. We should remember our creator. And one of the things I heard, you should remember your creator in your youth. That's good advice. You should remember your creator. We should fear God, which is a fear.
Oh, well, there's an interesting thing. The word he uses for fear, if you look, nearly every other place it's used in the Bible, it has to do with trembling fear. It has to do with, the angel saying, fear not. It has to do with someone being afraid because such and such. And I went through 24 of them or more, but they're all this is not the
reverence.
Kind of, reverence. He's literally saying, fear God, because he's going to judge everything anyway. So, I guess you might as well, actually what it says is to shema, to listen and hear, and then follow some stuff, because he's going to wind up judging you. I mean, you can't leave out the word for, because it means because you might as well follow him. You might as well do some stuff, because he's going to bring every deed into judgment, and all the hidden stuff and everything else. So you got something else? Because I do.
And go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Oh, no, well, I was going to say
About next, what's coming up?
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, we can finish that.
So, when we look at this, how do we avoid going down this path? First of all, Scott read earlier on, live by faith, which the people even in the Old Testament live by faith. And the proof of that is in Hebrews 11 and 12. Read the Bible, because it clearly says, guys, life is not supposed to be perfect. This is life. What?
Go ahead.
And finally, and this takes us, and I want to thank Dee, because what we're going to study next is happiness versus joy, and the biblical perspective of joy. So, and it seems to me that is a perfect segue to our next study.
Okay, so we're going to take a stab at that. Joy and happiness are words, and if someone wants to define them a certain way, I don't want to argue about that. There is a thing that is joy, and it is available to us And there is another state where we are momentarily happy. And if you have a preferred word for those things, fine. But there are two different states. One is much more dependent on conditions. And that's what we hope to talk about. So you have a few minutes?
Yes.
And I know how this is going to come across, and we have someone who's not been with us before. And I know, I understand, but I'm going to tell you anyway. Robin Williams said that if you talk to God, you're religious. If God talks to you, you're schizophrenic. Okay. We were in church when long time ago, and the pastor is doing a thing on Paul and was it Silas or Barnabas? I forget. And they're in prison, and there's the walls are shaking. It's an earthquake, and the gates are thrown open. The walls are brought down. And this pastor says, isn't it great that we serve a God who breaks down walls? And I heard, and I can't describe it any better than that, unless you happen to be the wall. And then I realized what I had heard, and I turned and I'm like, what? I don't know, what? And I looked at Mary like, did you hear that? And nobody's responded, and I cannot explain this. And it's if you want to think it came from inside my head, I don't know what it means unless you happen to be the wall. And for the rest of the day and sometime, I mean, this bothered me. And only through lots of consideration and prayer, I realized that if you are the wall and the ground gets shaken and it gets broken down, it hurts. It's going to be painful. If you're the wall, having a God who breaks down walls sort of stinks, because, and what I realized from this is that very often we are in prisons of our own making. We are part of the wall. We have gotten ourselves into a condition that if we go to God and we say, God, please fix it, take this away so that I'm not in this prison. I don't have this wall. And we're invested in the wall. And if it gets broken down, it hurts. And I realized I have personally been through that, where things that are taken away because I'd made a mess of things. So I want you to consider this. Solomon has 700 wives and 300 concubines. Can we agree that was probably not good for him, right? And was it exactly 700 and 300? Do I think he said, okay, 998, 999, 1,000, I'm done there. I don't need any more. I don't think it's intended to be an exact number, but it's somewhere around there. But for Solomon, who is clearly unhappy to get out of this hole that he's in, I think one of the steps that he would have to take would be to get rid of something that he has built up on his own. So he's got to say, you know what, you, the first one, and keep in mind, by the way, that if he married her when he was 19, she's now 59 also. Okay, these are not young princesses anymore, not all of them. But he took a while to collect that many. But he's going to have to say, you know what, I messed up. And in the sight of all of these good people, he's going to have to say, you can go home. You're not really wise anyway. You're, whatever, your status symbols. And he's going to have to suffer the consequences of having that wall broken down. And too often, and this is the thing I want to leave with this study of Ecclesiastes, this man is unhappy. This man is suffering. And yet a big part of it is stuff that he's gotten himself into. And I have seen and have been guilty over the years of saying, God, please make me happy, because we're not really saying, I've bought more house than I can afford. So help get me out of that. What we're saying is find a way that I can afford this thing I've done to myself. We're not willing to say, break down the wall and it's going to be painful. My experience has been the things I'm not willing to give up are taken away from me. But I've agreed to that. I accepted, I accepted that relationship that says, I agree to live by your words and your desires. And so Paul also tells us that a good father corrects his children. And if I say, look, this, I have chosen to be a child, I'm going to get corrected. And what Solomon has done here is shown us that when you're part of the wall, if it gets broken down, you're going to suffer some. I mean, you're going to suffer loss of status. You're going to suffer loss of esteem. You're going to look like a fool sometimes. And yet, if you choose not to do that, you wind up in this situation. You wind up in this shape where every day I wake up in that same prison. I wake up with those same walls, and I somewhere deep down know I've done this by turning away from what God has taught me to do. There's no escaping it. You cannot retain your hold on 700 wives and 300 concubines and not expect that there are going to be some ill consequences from it. And what you see in 12 chapters of distress is a result of that. There's no two ways around it. I don't believe at all that God seeks to judge us because he loves to judge. I think he corrects us, and I think he also tells us things that are not good for us. 700 wives, 300 concubines, and I keep going back to that because it's easy. But
We all have our 700 wives and 300
we do.
concubines.
We all have our thing. And I don't mind telling you some of mine. I mean, I will, I'm always said I'm willing to open up a vein and bleed for you. But if this study looks like, it's in the Bible and it's depressing, just understand Solomon put himself here and he clung to it apparently until the end. All right.
Fair.
Time is up.
Time is up.
God, what we're thankful for is that you love us. While we were yet sinners, you loved us. And yet you love us enough not to leave us the way we are. You give us instruction. You've given us words. You've left behind these things that show us a way to a life more abundant. And the thing that I would ask for this week for us is that you open our eyes and hearts to see that these things are not punishment. These laws that you give or these instructions that you give are not punishments. They're a guide to that life more abundant. Open our hearts to that. We know it's difficult, but we also know that you love us enough to give us a way back home. Be with us this week as we're sent out and help us find ways to bring that same grace that you pour out on us to those people we encounter. Amen.
So next week's a little different because we usually do a book. And so my commitment to you is midweek, I will send out Bible verses when we're looking at joy.
Yeah, it'll be fun. Do not get hung up on the two words joy and happiness, though. We want to talk about the conditions. I just don't want to get into semantic arguments.
Okay. You can unmute yourself, guys. And
Did we end the recording?
it ends all. Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
It's good to see all of you here. I still want some feedback. We've got the carpet, the rugs taken out, and if it's too echoey or something, then we need to make some adjustments.
Yeah.
All right.
There wasn't any echo at all.
Really?
Cool.
Yeah, it was good for me, for us.
Good deal.
Cindy and Paula, you guys have been on my mind for almost 2 weeks. And I know Mary reached out and we figured that's why we didn't hear back is you're busy. But I mentioned a week or two ago when I got into one of these things, and maybe some other time I'll tell them, but you guys saw me at my worst and were really instrumental in sort of saying, hey, you pulling me back from the cliff. We went through a situation with a builder and I got caught up in thinking it was in my power to fix it all. So I'm glad to see you here.
Oh my God, of course. We love you. Now, who did Mary reach out to?
You?
I left you a message.
Okay, I'll have to check. So I'm sorry. I didn't
Look at your
look.
voicemail.
Yeah, people don't listen to voicemail anymore. You have to text. So
I'm like, oh,
Thank you, Cheryl.
no, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'll go
No,
check.
it's okay.
I'm sorry.
You
We
guys.
love you.
have a good week.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
bye, guys. Have a great week.
Have a great week.
Goodbye.
Great
Goodbye.
week.